say hidden, and I bring a lot of light to it. So I've had a lot of issues and attacks in the past from people infiltrated by this force. The treaty that was done with the quote ETs,
with Eisenhower,
right? That treaty that was done was not literally done with ETs, but rather interdimensional archonic beings. I believe that America was sold out in a way to these entities that they could feed off of the mass public. That's what I believe. So I believe that even though it's sold off as, a treaty with ETs, it was actually interdimensional beings that they signed this treaty with.
Well, is there any other countries, though, that probably have the same thing?
I will say this. I do think that most elite leaders are compromised. I mean, if you wanted to invade somewhere, you try to take over the main leaders. That's the best way to do it. And that's what this force has done. What better way than to completely have control of entire nations? A lot of people aren't aware that they are infected by this. And I believe that there's probably a lot of elite leaders or elite people out there who don't even know that they're being manipulated by these forces. They think that the emotions and all of the thoughts and stuff are their own, when actually it's this force, these forces that are using them as a chess piece in its game against humanity.
Do you feel, though, another thing that you and I are both talking about is there seems to be, I think ABC News published articles with the fires and smoke in Australia with these strange-looking devil faces or demon faces coming out of the fire. I mean, maybe it's just ironic, or maybe it's a symbol of some sort. Do you feel as much as they seem to be making themselves known, is there actually a movement of good happening at the same time, and that's why they're pushing back? I mean, why now, is what I'm saying.
Yes, there's a great awakening happening. And since there's a great awakening happening, they are upset about this. And they want to go ahead and do their best to terrify humanity and scare it so that it's in a state of fear. And when you're in a state of fear, you lose your power. You're losing your energy. So they're trying to do that right now. And you know what? I do see this consciousness as almost, I wouldn't necessarily call it evil, even though it's doing things like this. I would say that a long time ago, those who opened the gates should have never opened those gates. And that force belongs in, it belongs in another dimension, and we need to push it back into that other dimension. And that's one of my, one of the missions I have here on Earth is to help lovingly, almost with unconditional love, push this using my light and using my heart to help push this force back where it belongs in its original resting place. Yes, it's showing up everywhere because it's scared too. It's scared it's losing control. So there's a battle going on and each side is scared. Humanity's scared, but I assure you this force too, it's scared to lose its control. And that's why it's acting out. And that's why we had an eclipse. We saw the devil horns. That's why we saw this really evil looking face in the fires in Australia.
Well, amazing. Thanks for spending a little time with us on Cosmic Cantina.
Thank you. Hey, thank you for having me on. I enjoyed it.
Wow, the Forbes article? I'd never ever seen
right?
That. And they just said straight up that there was like tall white aliens.
Right, that the United States is run by tall white aliens.
But they were being serious?
No, but it isn't like look, we bring up a lot of different news outlets, but it's Forbes. Like, why is that published in Forbes? It's just odd. It's just weird.
Well, because the Iranians said it, and it's bizarre, and Forbes can comment on the Iranians saying something bizarre without getting in trouble themselves, right?
Right, but still, like, the reason that they would decide to publish as strange. So
yeah, totally. Yeah,
but I was very interested in what she said about world leaders. I mean, she's kind of backing up what we were talking about earlier, is that could they be running by this force? Of course, I asked her, are they tall white aliens? She's like, no, it's just they're Archons, right? So that doesn't mean whatever they are, they can come up in any form that they want to.
Yeah, she says they're shapeshifters.
They're shapeshifters. So if you're used to seeing tall white aliens, then that's what you would see. Or
that's the part of the interview I took away, because a lot of my research, I was really interested in how people access these Archons? What are the rituals? How do people interact with these creatures? Or do they even? And she brought up in the interview talking about how they're influenced by them. So this leads into my research. When we come back, we're going to do our first segment called Woke AF, Top 3. And I'm going to break down the top 3 movies, films, or media that go into the Illuminati and the Archons and the rituals they use to communicate and gain power.
God,
Wow. Before I get started on the 3 most important movies in my life that talk
Josh
about
is
the
on
Illuminati,
fire.
I want to just say, first of all, whether or not it's real that people in the world, elites, are interfacing with Archons or demons and gaining power from them, whether or not that's real or not, I don't know. What I do know is real, which is really fascinating to me, is that they do these ceremonies. I mean,
they believe it, yeah.
They believe it.
It doesn't matter
and
if
they
you
do
don't,
it.
because they do.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. Right.
Is it just old as time rituals that super rich people do for initiation practices into these secret cults? Maybe. Is there actually power being drawn from it? I don't really know, but there's a lot of interesting stuff I found. All right, here we go. Woke AF Top 3. These top 3 aren't... I'm not going to say they're the best 3 movies ever made about the Illuminati, but the 3 of my favorites. The one is a recent one. It's fun. It just came out last year. It's called Ready or Not. And it's about a woman who marries into a super rich family that has all their money from a board game empire.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
I haven't seen it. Is it good?
It's pretty good. It's one of those straightforward movies. There's nothing big in it, but it's just done really well. It's a really good thriller.
Yeah.
There's lots of occult imagery in it. There's lots of occult things going on. Ultimately, they're performing a ritual where they have to kill her, ultimately, in order for the family to go on. I won't tell you what happens in the end. It's actually a pretty crazy ending that's supernatural.
A personal sacrifice.
A personal
which is
sacrifice.
The most that the god wants.
It starts with a game where, like, that might not happen, and they all draw a card, and they draw the wrong one, and they have to hunt her and kill her because it's a movie, and it's fun. But it's good. I'm not going to go deep into this one, more than just, like, it's just proof
No
that
spoilers.
movies are constantly made, and directors are constantly trying to get this information out there. This one I don't think is as deep as the ones I'm going to get into next, or it wasn't on purpose to try to get a message out. But that's the one thing I found out there. There's lots of directors and artists who are purposely layering their material to say something.
So is it that they're trying to get the word out, or is it just an innate thing in all of us that we're interested in, that we were drawn to, and it just
maybe
makes money?
maybe that's right. When we're trying to crack the code ourselves. I mean, that's what artists do. They don't actually solve problems. They just bring up things that like people don't want to talk about.
I think it's both. Ready or Not is what you're saying. It's just people who aren't consciously maybe even thinking about it. But the next one I want to bring up, everyone's probably seen this series. It's not a movie. It's called True Detective Season 1. It's about 2 detectives who uncover a horrible cult involving a church and high-level people.
Yeah.
And through the whole season, they unravel it. And in the end, it's very disheartening because they basically figure it out but can't do anything about it.
The Yellow King. So they never actually get to who the Yellow King is, but
No.
they sort of unlock the lower levels of what's happening. But there's always the question at the end of the series when they kind of find the killer, in quotes, but they never actually get to who's behind it all.
Right.
And that's the scary part of the whole series, because you realize it's just never
it
ends.
speaks to the cover-up, that these people can cover up anything, and it doesn't matter, they're above the law.
Yeah.
But this is actually based off, that show is interesting, but there's a short documentary that Vice did, Vice Media, that talks about the origins of the show. And it takes place in this small town in Louisiana with a very small church. The town itself was gorgeous and the people are nice, so I don't want anyone to think the town was evil. But this one church involved these 2 people who were horrible human beings who ran a church and had a youth room where they ran satanic rituals on children and adults. Crazy. The worst thing you could think of happened in this room over and over again.
God.
They went in and eventually figured out. These guys confessed, by the way. They just suddenly showed up at the police station and was like, hey, I've been doing terrible things for a long time and I feel really bad about it. And I don't know what to do about it. But anyways, what this is proof of is that, like, not only do the elites get attached to these entities, but somehow lower level people too get wrapped up in this craziness. But they were doing occult rituals, they were forming circles, they were doing the whole 9 yards.
This is about power.
Yeah, it was all about power. And they shut the lights off and all the walls would light up with black writing. You know, like, what's that called when it's like you can only see it when the lights are off?
Yeah.
That type of writing. It was super, super dark shit. And one thing that I've heard before from witnesses and people who have come forward from different these victims of these ceremonies who didn't die. The guy himself who did this, and other people have verified this is what they said. I mean, I don't know if it's real.
This is still true detective.
This guy would be performing these ceremonies, which are dark and terrible, which I'm not going to explain. But he claimed, and other people who were there witnessed, that he would actually shapeshift while it happened.
Whoa.
Into different types of animals, a lot of times reptilian, snakes, and wolf. And he would like literally change his face and take on the embodiment of it. So he'd get a little crazy, get a little wolfy, get a little snaky. but his face would change too. And I've heard that before in other ceremonies. I always thought that was really interesting, and it's not proof of anything, but it leads to the fact that it's not just a psychopath child molester doing something terrible and using religion as a way of manipulating people. It could be something else. He's literally...
He's actually tapping into something.
Yeah.
He's letting something else take over for the sake of power and control.
Maybe it's an Archon.
Yeah.
A demon, or whatever word or lens you want to use. I thought that was really interesting and also really terrible, and those two dudes are in jail for the rest of their life.
Thank God.
So I don't know if you've seen Hellier, and specifically Hellier Season 2.
I've been watching it. Awesome series.
Yes. Greg and Dana Newkirk, they're my heroes. But I don't know if we can do a show at some point about this.
We definitely should.
Season 2 gets into very similar territory.
People that
sort of-
evoke higher powers at a lower level, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, not the elites, right? It's not about the elites. It's like,
But, I mean, it is...
it's kind of like this, backwards town somewhere in the middle of the country.
Yeah, but it is the elites of the town. So it is like, there's claims, allegedly, the sheriff and a few other, like, higher-up people are kind of the perpetrators of what's going on. So, they're not like the president or the Queen of England,
Right.
but they are of that little town, of that little space. They are the kind of the top tier.
So it's always about power.
Yeah.
It's whoever's in power.
Yeah,
and it can be small or big. And it brings me to my third. This is one of my favorite movies in a weird way, because when you first watch it, I thought it was boring. This is the third in top 3. Yeah. The first time I watched it, I was like, that was ridiculous. It's called Eyes Wide Shut.
Of course.
Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman. I thought it was marketed as like a steamy sex romp with two like in their prime super hot Hollywood stars.
Right.
It was not.
Very good.
It was not. It was still a lot of sex going on in it, but not in a fun way. So the people who haven't seen this movie, I'm sure you heard of it. It involves a couple who's having marital issues, or at least the wife claims that she wants to cheat on him or had a fantasy about doing it. And it sets off the character Bill, the doctor, who gets involved. He's a house doctor to rich people. He gets involved. He gets invited to these like fancy ball parties in New York, and eventually he tries to join or gets initiated into a cult, and ultimately in the end he doesn't. This cult is the global elite. This is like the Illuminati. These are the Rothschild, the famous parties from the 70s. You've seen those pictures before?
Yes.
These pictures of these giant masks. This is that party. He ends up going to this party in the end where it is just rife with occult imagery. Everything from the floor is checkered, like Freemason temples and stuff, to every little thing. This is a Kubrick film, by the way, so every shot is rife with just so much metaphor and symbolism.
Right.
Beyond the point I don't even know. I have to look it up. Like there's a star of Ishtar in the back, which is a very occult symbol. There's and like the way they use it in the scene and when they come together, like it's all like that movie might be boring and you might not like it, and I really didn't the first time, but it is metaphor beyond metaphor. I mean, everything from the
You
pillars.
can like literally
kind of
pause
really-
and like analyze a frame. That's interesting. You brought up Ishtar. Ishtar was the first, and I think I talked about this in an earlier podcast. Ishtar, the house of Ishtar, was the place where all the women that were goddesses would stay, and it was also the bank, right? So when you would cash in your chips and you produce enough crop, then you would get to sleep with one of the goddesses. So that would make sense that it was in the Kubrick frame, a certain frame.
Well, some people argue that whole film is about worship of goddesses, which is interesting. Nicole Kidman's character is the Scarlet Woman from Alice Crawley's.
Alice Crowley.
Yeah.
Right, the Red Woman.
The Red Woman. That's
Yes.
what she is. That's what she represents in the movie, which is interesting.
So they shot that whole the sexcapades, that whole what was it, ritual sex orgy thing that they did. That was actually shot in a Rothschild mansion.
Yes,
I
heard it
didn't
in
know
England.
that.
Yes, it was shot in England, which is really fascinating. But it takes place in New York. The whole movie is about New York. But
It's set in-
which is super weird. And in the party itself, they even have like, when the rituals happen, there's a circle, there's sex happening everywhere. It is something straight out of what you would look up what an Illuminati sex power magic ritual is about. I don't know like what that ritual was or how it works, but I want to get to the next point. So there's a prostitute in the movie who helps Bill at one point, and then she ends up dead. What I did some research. I was like, okay, if these rituals exist, which I've heard many people talk about them, I'm assuming they do exist.
Right.
There must be something out there. There must be someone who's been in these sex parties who didn't get killed and came out and talked about it. So I did find one woman who seems super credible, who has a bunch of videos about her and a bunch of articles, and her name was Annika Lucas. And she claims that she was sex trafficked at a young age, from 6 until she was a teenager, in Belgium, which a lot of people talk about Belgium, the hotspot, and NATO being there as being one of the centers of pedophilia and a lot of these satanic rituals, which is really interesting. And she claims that she was, ritually abused for a long time by world leaders, not just nobodies, by random people, like second in power for a country. And she doesn't go into the names in the videos, but you can